And if we're all encouraged to be our own unique spark and bring that full creative self to work, imagine how much joy we would have in a workplace.
Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and on the podcast today is Scott Shute. Scott is the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn and author of the brand new book, The Full Body Yes. I am so excited to share with you today's conversation. Scott is really at the intersection of the workplace and ancient wisdom traditions. He has been an active advocate for customers and employees in the technology space for over 20 years. But at the same time, he's deeply rooted in mindfulness and meditation and compassion, and he blends his lifelong practice and passion with his practical leadership and operations experience in his role at LinkedIn. Scott's mission is really to change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. So in today's episode, we talk all about Scott's journey becoming the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn and writing his new book, The Full Body Yes. Scott shares with us what it would really mean to bring our full selves to work, why we need to do it and its impact, and why mindfulness is even relevant to the workplace to begin with. We talk about compassion in leadership, why we're often climbing the wrong mountain when it comes to success. Scott shares with us what a full body yes actually means and what it looks like. You're going to love this part of the conversation. And we talk about moving from pessimism to optimism and why we really need to celebrate our failures. Plus, Scott shares with us his go-to mantra, his biggest dream, and so much more. Before we dive in to today's new episode with Scott, I'm excited to share with you that today's episode is brought to you by Seek the Joy Summer. So I announced our brand new summer series last week on the podcast, and you guys have totally blown me away so far with the response to Seek the Joy Summer, and I'm just getting so excited to share these incredible sessions with you. We are coming together in community to welcome in the warmth, the freshness, and the joy of the summer season on Sunday, June 20th, and you are invited from a beautiful solstice meditation, yoga flow, and community chat, sound healing, and workshops on sanctuary, the energy of the summer season, the power of play, and stepping into our self-care. I just know you're going to walk away from this series feeling refreshed, energized, inspired, and just ready to welcome in this new season. So our summer series is completely free. It's going to feature all the sessions I just talked about. They're pre-recorded, and we go live on Sunday, June 20th, and I cannot wait for you to check it out. So to learn more and to register for free, head on over to seekthejoypodcast.com/seekthejoysummer. I will also include the link to sign up in the show notes. You have access to all of these sessions, these pre-recorded sessions and workshops for 2 weeks through July 4th. So I just think it's going to be an awesome way, the perfect way, if you ask me, to welcome in the summer season. Our new episode with Scott, honestly, I just think it couldn't be more timely, especially as, so many of us, myself included, continue to return to the workplace after a year at home. And you'll hear this in the episode, but as Scott so beautifully shares, our journey towards greater happiness and meaning at work is really fueled by compassion, both compassion for ourselves first and then for others. And so when we bring this sense of greater mindfulness and compassion into our lives and into the workplace, we can find a greater source of happiness and authentic meaning. So I'm so excited to share this really wonderful conversation with you. As always, I would love to hear what you think. Make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, make sure you hit follow or subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Ratings and reviews really help the show get seen by new people. So take a screenshot of that review and send it to me, Sydney at seekthejoypodcast.com. I will send you something to say thank you. And it's just always such a wonderful way to connect outside of the show. As a reminder, you can always tune in to our new episodes on our YouTube channel. Click the link in our show notes to tune in, and while you're there, make sure to hit subscribe. All right, guys, that is it. I'm so excited for you to hear this one with Scott. As he shares, we all really deserve to do work that makes us happy, and through mindfulness and compassion, we can all really get there. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Scott Shute, head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn and author of the brand new book, The Full Body Yes. This is going to be such a great conversation today because you are the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn. And I will admit, before I was introduced to you, I didn't even know that was a thing. So how does one become the head of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn?
Sure.
Where did your journey with this begin?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Okay, how did we get here? So on the one hand, I've had this career as as an executive leading customer service or customer operations functions. And that was the role I had when I started at LinkedIn almost 9 years ago now.
Wow.
And at the same time, I've been kind of a dual agent in that I've had a practice, a contemplation or meditation practice since I was 13. I've been teaching since I was in college, and it's been a huge part of my life. Now, about 6 years ago, a couple of years into my journey at LinkedIn, I realized how amazing of a place it was. Our CEO at the time, Jeff Weiner, was talking about his own practice using Headspace. He was talking about compassion in leadership. And I was thinking, wow, this is probably a place where I can bring this part of myself that I never shared at work, to the workplace in a totally respectful and secular way. And so about 6 years ago, I led one meditation. And honestly, I was terrified because I didn't know what people would what are people going to think of me? And what is this going to do for my brand? And all this, kind of fear and ego stuff.
Yeah.
And so I started with this one meditation. And the first time there was one guy there.
Wow.
And I'm sure that he was just as terrified as I was. I never saw him again. And the next week there were 3. And the week after that, there were 5. And then it became a regular thing. And then I would get invited to bigger things, so the marketing team would have an offsite where they do breakout groups of 80 or 100 people. And I would lead, a couple of the breakouts in meditations. Or the CFO would have a summit with 400 people and ask me to kick things off. And so I kind of got known as the meditation exec. And I raised my hand to be our executive sponsor of our mindfulness program. We didn't really have one. So myself and a bunch of other volunteers, created one. And that's been building over the last 5 or 6 years. And then for me, the tipping point was 3 years ago, our CEO, Jeff, gave the commencement address at Wharton and talked about compassion, right? And I was thinking, wow, that's interesting. And then the next few times he's on TV, this is all the reporters want to talk about is compassion in leadership. And I was thinking, this is great. It's time, I'd been in my ops role for 6 years. It was time for me to do something different anyway. But I was thinking, wow, we're out in the world and essentially telling our employees that the number one thing they can do is to be compassionate. But what does that mean when we send them back to their desks?
Right.
And so I made a pitch to Jeff, our CEO, and to our head of HR. And with their great support, essentially created this role, head of mindfulness and compassion. And I have, happy to go into more detail about what that means, but that's how we got here.
Yeah, I love this. And I love what you said that for your life, your whole life, you were a dual agent.
Yeah.
So you had this, I think, very corporate side of you, but also this very spiritual and intuitive side of you. And I think I'm really struck by what you said about how you had this anxiety or this fear of bringing your full self to work. I think so many of us experience this because you want to portray a professional, and I'm putting up air quotes, persona. And oftentimes spirituality or intuitiveness, or those are not always connected.
That's right.
I really love the messaging of your book and what you talk about. And from what I'm gathering so far in our conversation is part of, it sounds like compassion is allowing yourself to fully show up as who you are.
It
And when you
starts
do
with,
that, right, it just
that's right.
changes things for you.
That's right. Thank you. It starts with self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we typically have this negative voice. I think Ariana Huffington calls it the obnoxious roommate, that inner critic that's telling you no, and
Mm-hmm.
just sit down and be quiet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because we have that voice, we don't really share our full selves. But here's the thing. I think that one of our biggest desires, our deepest held needs as humans, is the need to be seen and heard, and even beyond that, acknowledged and loved, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
we share so little of ourselves, right? Like the iceberg model, we're sharing just the tip of the
The
iceberg,
very tip. Yeah.
the very tip.
Yeah.
But when we really get comfortable with ourselves and have that inner strength, that inner power to draw down the waterline and show other people who we are. Now, if we're met with resistance, what happens? The waterline shoop, goes back
Mm-hmm.
up,
Mm-hmm.
and we go back to just, be in the quiet little, just
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But if we can draw it down and we're brave and we get good response back, then we're encouraged to go even further, and it builds that strength. And so part of it is having an environment where you're safe to do that. And I think we're always kind of seeking that environment in our friend group or associations we make or our family. We want to draw the waterline down and be safe. And so this is kind of a multi-part process. Like the first part is to really have that deep sense of security in who we are and be able to draw the waterline down for ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to love every part of us. And that's, as you might experience, very hard, for
Mm-hmm.
some of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you mentioned it really begins with self-compassion. And I think part of self-compassion too is having patience for yourself
Mm,
and acknowledging that it's not always going to be smooth and being
yeah.
okay with whatever the journey brings you. And I know in the book you talk about the role of mindfulness as well
Mhm.
in compassion. And I would love to talk a little bit about that too, because I think when we think about mindfulness, we don't often tie it to the workplace. Like I
Yeah.
don't show up to work every day thinking, I'm going to be bringing my mindfulness practice
Right.
into that
Right.
environment. So
Right.
what has your experience been like with that? Or what are your insights on really
Sure.
mindfulness as a whole, maybe, or maybe how it plays into the workplace?
Yeah, let's talk about mindfulness in the workplace, because some people are still like, wait, what? Why does
Hmm.
why does this matter?
Yeah.
So first, let's talk about context. Let's talk about the context of the workplace and how it has changed. So if
Mm.
we rewind 5,000 years to when the pyramids were built, and for a long time after that, we had not great work environments, right?
Hmm.
We had
Yeah.
kings and slaves and maybe indentured servants, or we had landowners and serfs. It was not good, right?
No.
Workers were not treated well. And you fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, when you imagine a giant factory, now everybody making kind of the same widget or doing something very small. Still, workers not treated very well. They were viewed as changeable. But in the information age, a company like LinkedIn and many other big companies, we don't have hard assets. We don't
Mm.
have factories. We're not selling cars or copper. All we have is our people, right? This is literally all we have in terms of assets. And so it makes sense that if our people are our number one asset, then our number one investment should be in our people
Mm.
in all ways, because we know just from a business sense that if people are at their best, if they're at their best physically, emotionally, mentally, the environment, then they're going to be better. So that's the environment we start with, is that
Hmm.
work has changed and the value of a worker has changed.
Right.
Now, in that environment, physical exercise has made this, kind of evolution over the past 50 or 60 years. Like our grandparents didn't exercise.
No.
They worked really hard physically, but they didn't exercise. This is a new phenomenon, right? And there's even articles in the 70s about, CEOs that are running and no one's even chasing them. Like it was so strange. But now in the workplace, physical exercise in big companies, that have lots of employees, we offer gyms, and classes on TRX and weight training and blah, 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 right? Because we know that physical exercise reduces stress, reduces anxiety. And everybody knows, as workers, we all know the benefits of physical exercise. We
Mhm.
may or may not do it, but we all
Right.
know it.
Right.
This brings us to mindfulness. So if you think of mindfulness as a mental exercise, right? The science is already there. Over 6,000 peer-reviewed papers on how mindfulness reduces stress, reduces anxiety, increases creativity, increases the quality of our relationships, increases focus. probably increases productivity. And you think about in the work environment, in the information age, most of our jobs are not physically demanding. We don't need people to run a 6-minute mile. We don't need them to lift really heavy things in the information world. Of course, there's still manufacturing and some people do, but a lot of these jobs are information jobs. What we do need people to do is be focused and to be resilient mentally, to be resilient emotionally, to be stable emotionally. And so mindfulness is one of the tools that we can offer. So the ROI on and it doesn't cost almost anything to offer these types of things, but the ROI is enormous.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this idea of mainstreaming mindfulness so that it is just as common or just as important and acknowledged as being, because it is as important, but be acknowledged as being just as important as physical exercise. And recognizing, that the time that you invest in yourself, in allowing yourself, I think, to feel more grounded or rested or just even understanding yourself. I think tapping into yourself that way is a huge part of mindfulness. It can't have a negative effect. That's for sure.
Exactly.
It can only make things better.
Exactly. It allows us to be more focused and more self-aware. And when we have that self-awareness, we become more aware of other people. We become better teammates. Ultimately, really, we become more aware of our customers. We become more empathetic and compassionate towards our customers, and we want to do the right thing by them. And so ultimately, I think that employees who practice like this end up delivering much better solutions for our customers. And honestly, the company does a lot better because of it.
I think the timing of our conversation too, and the timing of your new book, Full Body Yes, is really interesting because obviously it's been more than a year into the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been experiencing several pandemics at the same time. There's a mental health crisis. So many people are facing burnout. They're overworked. There's been tons of crossing boundaries in workplaces. I mean, most of us are now working from home, and that's a huge, new boundary. I think so many of us have had to create for ourselves.
That's right.
And I think it's interesting, when you brought this up earlier about compassionate leadership, what are your thoughts, or how can companies, I think, best support their employees through compassion or through mindfulness, especially as we are, like I mentioned, really experiencing this mental health crisis, and working from home, I think, is a huge part of it.
For sure. Just a couple other notes on what you said, and you put it so well. Not only are we working from home, we're living at work.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
We are living at work. The boundaries are, they're kind of there, but it's up to us. Only
you have to make it yourself.
To draw them. And another point is that we are suffering a pandemic of connectivity, of disconnectivity.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're not able to just see other people physically and hug them and kind of be with them. And so we can still connect, but it's much harder. Okay, so what can companies do? I think it starts with talking about it, and it starts from the top, right? One is to recognize that, yes, we care about our employees, right? And it's a constant messaging of, hey, we want you guys to know that your health, especially your mental health, is the most important thing right now. So if you need help, here are all of the resources. That's like a minimum, right? And that's like, these are emergency room resources, like, unfortunately, suicide hotline or EAP programs or things like that. But beyond that, it's offering things that are more like vitamins, right? To keep us healthy versus deal with us when we're in trouble. And the vitamins are, like mental wellness programs, like meditations, like group, sessions where we're connecting with each other and talking about real things. Another thing leaders can do is lead by example. And I think this is one of the beautiful things that I'm seeing, at least in my world, is that in the old days for our company, all company meeting, the CEO or the executives would be on stage, and it's kind of a separation, right?
Yeah.
Now everybody's on Zoom. We're all in these little black boxes.
Yeah.
We see the executives' kids walking through meetings. We see their dog. We see the mess of their whatever room they're in, or the posters from their kids from grade school that have been drawn. Like it's more humanizing. And so if the leaders also talk about their own challenges and just acknowledge, their own challenges, as well as the challenges that we all face, it allows us all to kind of exhale and go, okay, I don't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I realize that we're all in this together. I'm not the only one. And it creates a space where we can talk about mental health without all of the stigmas that have been there for a very long time. So those are a few of the things.
Yeah. To me, it feels like humanizing our experience as humans, which
Yes.
might sound kind of silly, but I think often, and I've noticed this especially with those who are in leadership positions within companies, you don't want to show too often that you are human, that you
Yeah.
have your own experiences with mental health or difficulties within your family or whatever the situation might be. So I love what you said, that it's really about humanizing yourself
That's right.
and showing those around you. And whether you're the CEO of a large company or you are managing a team or you are an employee of a company, period, I think getting
Yeah.
comfortable, and it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, bringing your full self to work allows you to
Right.
humanize your experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's simple like that. Leaders
Mm-hmm.
doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It could be one of the practices that we do at LinkedIn, especially with staff meetings, like where we know each other and it's a regular thing,
Yeah.
is starting the meeting with some sort of personal thing, like starting it with, hey, what's something you're grateful for? And we don't
Mm-hmm.
force everybody like go around the room, but like,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to talk about something, talk about it, or what's a personal win or something that happened on the weekend. And it's a little counterintuitive for some people, because some people it's just like, let's just do it. Let's just talk about the project.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what happens is when we see each other as humans first, instead of
Mm-hmm.
as our roles or instead of as workers, then we start to bring more of ourselves to work. And we start to bring more of ourselves to work. We're making those connections. And it's counterintuitive because it takes a little time up front, but we end up moving faster later because we have much better relationships. We have better connections. We have more of a code that we can talk to each other in, a shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go farther faster when we spend time, investing up front.
Mm-hmm.
And for leaders themselves, it's, we tend thinking about my evolution of work, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's so much easier to be a command and control leader,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of, lead by fear. It's like, just do what I say. Here's what we're doing. Just do it. That's
Mm-hmm.
easy to say. And I don't have to reveal anything about myself when I do that. But when I'm human and
Mm-hmm.
I share some of my own vulnerability and I share some of my story, and I also, in turn, I want to know your story as well. I become a better leader. Again, it's counterintuitive because people will follow a person they respect and love way more than they will follow a person they respect but fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful point. And I'm so glad that you went there, because when it's also about building rapport and about building
Yeah,
personal relationships with people.
that's right.
And something that's always been so important for me within my role where I work is to get to know the people that I work with, even if we just work with each other once a month, getting to know them, having a conversation. But you're right. I mean, so many people are like, let's just get to the project. I don't want to,
Yeah,
we don't need to socialize. But especially
yeah,
now, being home, only communicating through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or a phone call, it is
right.
so important now more than ever to build those connections with other people. It's building a bridge, I think, and we're missing that. I love what you said earlier about this pandemic of being disconnected,
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
because we think we're so connected. You and I are
that's
talking
right.
right now on
That's
Zoom.
right.
We are connected, but it
Yeah,
doesn't replace the interaction of being in person with someone. So I
that's
love
right.
what you shared about, it's
Yeah,
about humanizing, it's about building a bridge and really developing personal relationships with people.
that's right. We in the book I talk about, my own experience, but I think the experience of many or maybe
Mm-hmm.
even all of us, in that we often are climbing the wrong mountain in how we're
Mm.
defining success. For me myself, I'm the youngest of five. It was really important to me as a teenager to shine, and perhaps shine more brightly than my
Mm-hmm.
siblings.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to achieve so that people would notice me.
Yeah.
I and I was only thinking about my own success, and I climbed the career ladder very quickly. And that's typically how we measure ourselves, is really,
Totally.
how will other people measure me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's that external validation.
Yeah.
And it comes through status, or it comes through money, or it comes through belongings, or the type of car you drive, or jewelry you wear, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that, I think, not none of it, but what I think is true is that no matter what role you're in, and no matter how obsessed you are or in love with that role you are in 15 years, it will be reduced to 3 bullets on a resume or 3 bullets on a LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm.
But on our deathbed, when we're old and hopefully in our 80s or 90s or hundreds or whatever, we'll measure our own success by those that we love around us, by our connections, really our connections. And so this is a different mountain to climb, right? Are we investing our time in building those connections, which is really the thing of the heart, and also how we view ourselves internally,
Mm-hmm.
versus striving for something that's really only how we're viewed externally,
Mm-hmm.
and is often false. It's often just the story we're telling ourselves about how things really are.
Always. It's always a story. I mean, for years, I defined myself and my self worth by the external, by that measure of success that you were exactly talking about. And I think it's so interesting how the way in which you sort of framed it as climbing the wrong mountain, because I
Hmm.
think we're often taught our value rests in what we achieve.
Yeah.
And that's also why there's such a pandemic of burnout right now,
Yeah.
because we are on this sort of productivity train or hamster wheel where we
Yeah.
feel like in order to have worth, we have to be producing a lot. We have to be
Yeah.
working a lot.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how you talk about how you needed to make that shift for yourself to
Hmm.
really define your worth, and your definition of success had to change.
Yeah.
So, how do you define success today? I'm so curious.
Ah, that's a good question. And let me back up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because somebody could be hearing this and say, oh, so I don't need to work, or I don't need
Mm.
to progress.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another really important point in that there's an element of self-expression and growth, which I think is really important and critical.
Yeah.
Like I believe that we're this pure spark of energy, right? And making our way in the world. And each one of us is unique, but also connected. And each one of us is driven to express ourselves. And that expression can take place in, oh, how good of an accountant I am, or how good of a mother I am, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the thing is, or an artist. And we're constantly trying to hone that craft, because that is us. That's our expression of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's nothing wrong with being a great, whatever, venture capitalist or great executive or great mother. The challenge is when we get so obsessed with the outcome,
Mm.
right? So obsessed with, it's back to it's the journey, not the destination,
Right. Right.
right? It's the joy is in our own growth, right? So when you ask me what I define my success as, I want to remove my own filters and really let my own light shine,
Mm.
right? And do that in a way where I'm continuing to hone my craft and benefit society, but I'm also becoming more and more and more the real me, like drawing the water line down 100% on that iceberg and letting everybody
Mm-hmm.
see while I'm still growing, and have that growth be for the good of the whole, not just for my own development.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I want to sit with that for a moment, because allowing your full self to shine through is
Yeah.
success
Yeah.
in many, many ways. And we don't view it that way. We're not taught to view it that way. And I know in the book, too, you talk about how happiness plays a
Yeah.
role in
Yeah.
how we should maybe, or we view success. Could you talk a little bit about that too? Because I think,
Sure.
we are on Seek the Joy podcast. And I do think I love this concept of really how, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the more you can tap into your joy or your
Yeah.
happiness,
Yeah.
it fuels your ability to have more compassion for yourself and show up as your full self. So I'd love
That's
to
right.
talk a little bit about that, because I think it's so valuable, especially in this framework of
Sure.
success.
Let me talk a little bit about pessimism versus optimism.
Mm.
And because what I would say is, I don't know if happiness is exactly the word I'm looking for, but
Mm.
let's talk about optimism versus pessimism.
Mm-hmm.
So as humans, we are programmed. We have evolved in a way that has kept us alive, right? So like physically, our amygdalas are always searching for danger, looking for the things in our life that are bad so that we stay alive. And in fact, you see this on the evening news. The news is essentially a mirror of our amygdalas. What are all the things we're afraid of? Now, that translates into our emotions and our mind as well. We tend to have a negativity bias, meaning we view everything in our life. We look at it as what's the worst thing that could happen here? Because that's how we stayed alive. Here's a key word, alive, not happy, right? And so if we want to move from feeling just, alive to feeling something more, it's this move from pessimism to optimism. So in other words, think of a road, like I call this pothole management. You could have a road that's 1,000 miles long. And if it has one pothole, where do we put our attention? Right? Think like at work. If everything's great, except you have this one problem, where do we spend our staff meeting? We're talking about the one problem. And there's nothing wrong with trying to fix the one pothole in our life. What's wrong is we spend 99% of our energy on the 1% of our life that's wrong, instead of, a more balanced approach. And so when we ask ourselves, okay, well, what else is good? In other words, an optimistic view, then we can celebrate the 999 miles of perfect road. We can celebrate the people who made it that way and kept it that way. It's like in our own life, when we get a performance review, there can be 5 pages of praise and 1 half paragraph of like, here's what Scott needs to work on for next time. And where do we obsess? We obsess
one half
on those,
paragraph.
Yeah, all the time, right? And because of that, our lives get really small. When we're pessimistic, we don't try new things. We only stick to, the top of the iceberg where it's already sunny and well-worn. But when we're optimistic, we tend to think like, okay, well, let me try that new thing. And it pushes me out of my comfort zone. But then I realize my comfort zone is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I look back and it's like, wow, look at all the things I've done. Look how comfortable I am doing all these things. So for me, it's this movement from away from just thinking about what's wrong to including the what's right as well, not sugarcoating or ignoring the what's wrong, but just shifting the focus a little bit. And when I shift the focus to the things that are good, it makes me stronger to deal with the things that are hard or, quote, wrong in my life.
This is so interesting to me because you're right. We often spend way too much time focusing on the negative or the one half paragraph of constructive criticism, as opposed to really focusing our energy and our attention on the things that are going well and the things that are going right. I think it's interesting too, what you said about how in doing so, in focusing on the positive and focusing on that optimistic perspective, it almost allows you to build up a muscle so that you gain greater confidence, or you're more assured with yourself, so that you can face an obstacle head on. And I think we need that. We need to be able to, pump ourselves up a little bit to face what's coming at us. But I don't know if we're often demonstrated or taught sort of that perspective or that ability to, really build up your confidence or those muscles in that way.
One of the things that businesses and leaders can do is to occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally celebrate the failures, right? Because what usually happens is we fail and we don't want to tell anybody about it, right? No. We barely will tell our boss, and our boss will not tell their boss, and et cetera, et cetera. But if we get into this mode where we're like, hey, you know what? Here's what happened. Joe tried this new thing, and here's all the things that went well, but here's the things that spectacularly went wrong. And let's all talk about it, and let's celebrate Joe. Like we might even give Joe an award for trying something new, but let's realize all the things we learned from it, right? And what this does is it then gives license for other people to try something that's out of the box. And it creates this culture where like, it's okay to fail. We don't want to do it all the time. We want to learn like what worked and what didn't work, but we're also not just closing down and just staying safe, because that's not good for our business or for us personally.
No, celebrating failure. We don't do enough of that. And I've definitely had moments, I think, within the last few years when I will try something brand new or put myself out there in a new way or reach out to somebody new or something. And even if it doesn't get the result that I want, I am choosing more than ever to celebrate the fact that I tried, that I put myself out there. And I think we need to do more of that. It's not always going to go the way we imagine. We will fail. We will land on our butt. But you know what? The growth and the learning that comes from doing something new, invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
I think this is, for me, I'm just over 50 now. And one of the very few benefits of getting older is that you've seen more cycles, right?
Yes.
And so in my career, I've had my job eliminated 3 times and almost eliminated 2 other times. And before it happened the first time, I would have said, "Oh my God, that's devastating." But with the benefit of time, you realize actually in that period of time, that turned out to be the best thing for my career.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the moment, no, it was not fun. And it
No.
was, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was not fun. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But sometimes it's these challenges that force us to try something new, right? Because here's what I believe. I believe that life never gives us more than we can handle.
Mm-hmm.
It might give us more than we can handle with our current skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're forced to learn a new skill to deal with life's challenges. And then over time, you look back, or me having being the benefit of being a little bit older, I can appreciate those challenges because like, wow, I am so much more capable than I was when I was X years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
all
so
of it's
much
because of
comes.
these new experiences.
So much comes with experience and putting yourself out there and not allowing yourself to stay, within the confines of a safe
That's right.
box, so to speak.
That's right.
It's so interesting. I think especially in the last year, so many of us are reevaluating the fulfillment really that we get from our jobs or our careers or the time in which we spend working. And I know in the book you talk about some questions that people can ask themselves if they're in this space of sort of reevaluating where they're at. Is there one question or where's a good place, for them to start?
Wow.
Because I think so
think,
many of us are in that space right now of what am I
sure,
doing? Does this still feel
sure.
good? Am I excited by it?
Well, first of all, those are great
Did I
questions.
just answer my own question?
Maybe. I mean, there's kind of a process, and I think it depends on how much work someone has done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I was starting with someone who had not done the work at all,
Yeah.
I would talk about values,
Mm.
right? Like have you identified your core values? And most people, they get triggered when those values are stomped on, whether they're aware of them or not. And I think it's really important to get them down, put them down on paper and know what your most important values are.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you're clear on your values, then ask the questions you just asked,
Mm.
which is essentially, is this job, is this life, is this path, whatever I'm doing right now, am I moving closer to the heart of my values or further away?
Mm.
Right? So I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I took a call from a recruiter. She was trying to recruit me to be the COO of a company, that was going to be the next Uber. It was going to be a rocket ship. And my ego was totally, like,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Because on paper, it sounds like a dream job. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the trouble. My daughter had just started high school at the time. The job was 2 states away. It was in an industry that I wasn't really interested in. The job itself, as we got into the details, I wasn't really interested in. But there was still this huge part of my brain that was like, you should totally do it. Come on. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
which it's for all the wrong reasons. For all the wrong reasons. I wanted to do it because of the title and because of the money.
Mm-hmm.
Not because, one, I love the job, not because it's where I wanted to live, or not because it would support my daughter and my family in the life we wanted to live. And so ultimately I chose no because of those 3 things. Those were more valuable. I want to do a job that I love. My family and my relationships are super important to me. And I want to live in a place that I want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the types of choices we're making every minute, of the day. And the biggest ones are the ones, like these big career or relationship shifts. And so I think going back to values, is this getting me closer to the heart of my values or not?
Mm. I love this idea of starting by tapping into your values. Some of us don't even know what those are. So just
Right.
taking the time to do that exercise feels so valuable. No pun intended. Because I think too, part of, understanding and knowing your values in that process, it becomes about empowering yourself.
Yes.
Empowering yourself to know and to trust any decision that you make, the way in which something makes you feel. And this is bringing me back to just the theme, I think, of this whole conversation too, which is that when you tap into this sense of mindfulness and compassion, you're able to empower yourself in the
Yes.
workplace too.
That's
And I'm
right.
curious, what have you seen in your time at LinkedIn or in your own life as well, maybe just about the impact of
Sure.
mindfulness and compassion
I'll
in,
tell you
in
a
the
couple.
workplace.
So oftentimes people ask me, okay, what's the ROI on this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's a good question. And mostly I measure things now by first consumption. In other words, do people come to the things I offer?
Yeah.
And then customer satisfaction. When we do surveys, do they enjoy the stuff we do? And that's a good start. I think it's really hard to measure directly ROI versus of doing a meditation session to production. Maybe we'll get there someday. But what I know is the stories that people tell me, and they're very consistent. But here's a couple examples. I had one where this young woman was in my organization, and long story short, I got to talk to her about her experience with our program, and she said, "Okay, look, a year ago, I thought this whole mindfulness stuff was just a bunch of BS."
Hmm.
She said it in a more colorful way. She said, "But you guys did this 30-day challenge, and I like a good challenge, so I signed up for it." The challenge was to meditate, using this app for 20
Mm-hmm.
times during
Mm-hmm.
the month. And she
Hmm.
said, "And now I have a 400-day streak going. I've been doing this for 400 days."
Wow.
And she said, "It's changed my life."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, that's awesome." She says, "No, no, no. Here's the good part." She said, "This morning, I went and I presented at our all hands for her group, which was a group of like 80 people or so." She said, "A year ago, I never, and I mean never, would have done that. I
Hmm.
was a spaz, I didn't have control of my emotions." And she went on to describe her life then. She said, "But now I'm feeling more confident. And even this morning, I was freaking out a little bit. But before I went on stage, I went to a conference room and I did my breathing. And then I went out there and I crushed it."
Hmm.
And later I was talking with my friends who run the group, and I asked about this woman, and they're like, "Oh yeah." And I didn't tell them the story. They're like, "Oh yeah, like she has totally changed. Like, I don't know what's going on with her, but like she has totally come out of her shell."
Wow.
And I was thinking, wow, this is why we do this work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then I get hundreds of emails like the following. This young mother emailed me with a note of gratitude, just a short note. It was essentially, "Hey, thanks for offering the stuff that you guys offer. I'm home by myself with two little kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm screaming at them a lot less." And it wasn't quite that bad. She went on to say, "It's like, hey, I feel like I can be so much more present.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can be there for them, and that's what I really want to be." In other words, she's saying, "I'm more of who I want to be because of these things."
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, this is it. This is why we do what we do.
I am more of who I want to be. That's
Yeah.
the crux. That's the crux of all of it. It's just becoming more of who you are, of who you want to be. And like you said, bringing down that line on the iceberg.
Yeah.
Your book is called Full Body Yes. So I got to ask you, what is a full body yes? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So that kind of riffing on the theme you said, that, like
Mm-hmm.
it's when we take down all of the water and
Mm.
we really feel in alignment with ourselves. Um, that's the deepest one, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
really feel like there's no more filter, there's no more judgment. We just are, like, we feel totally comfortable with who we are. Sometimes it happens when you just know something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can
Mm-hmm.
happen in a little way, like you're reaching for a small choice. Like, do I eat the cereal or the fruit for breakfast? And like, you just know, it's like, oh, I want the cereal. Like, that's a full body. There's no doubt. Like, you just want the cereal.
Yeah.
But sometimes it happens in a really deeper way, like when these big decisions, should I stay in this relationship or not? Should I start this relationship? Should I take this job and quit this job? Like these big decisions. There are times, so as an example, when I got recruited to start at LinkedIn, I loved my other company. I loved my other job. I didn't want to leave,
Mm.
but I took the call and I started interviewing, and I went through so many rounds of interviews. And then one night I was sleeping and I woke up in the middle of the night, like 1:30, 2 o'clock, and I was wide awake. And I just had this knowingness. It's like, I'm supposed to do this job. Like, I don't know why, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to take this job. And I just knew. And that was, we went on to do more interviews, but internally the decision had been made. Like, I just knew.
Yeah.
To me, that's what the full body yes is.
Hmm. What do you hope readers will take away from the book? This episode will come out a few weeks after it's
Yeah.
finally out in the world, but what do you hope people will take away from it?
So first of all, I hope they read it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like if
Yes.
you can't afford the book, just reach out to me. I'll give you a copy. Seriously,
Oh,
I just want people to read it.
yeah.
Here's the deal. This is not one of those boring business books. Like I tell a bunch of my own stories, times where I got it wrong, times where I got it right. I think it's a good read. And there's like 40 stories. I think there's at least one story for every person where you go, oh, that's me.
Mm.
That's me. And it's intended to be a fire starter. It's intended to be like to shift the trajectory of your life just a little bit, whether that's towards more self-compassion, whether that's towards more living your purpose, whether that's towards just getting control of your anger. Like we're all at a different place in this journey. And there's at least one story, I know it, which will change your life.
I love this. All right. So I want to end by asking you two questions I normally ask anyone that comes on the show. The first one is, do you have a mantra or an affirmation or something that you hold close to you that has really helped to guide you on your journey so far?
I might give a couple here.
Love it.
One of my things from childhood. So my father, when I was a teenager, my father and I had a tumultuous relationship, and then it got, much better as I got older.
Yeah.
Probably I was the one changing, right? This is how this works. But when I was 15, his advice to me was, most of your problems can be solved if you have a good attitude.
Right on the money. Yes.
And it turns out, like, I didn't want to hear that when I was 15, but the wisdom of that is so deep, like so beyond, maybe even beyond what he was thinking about. But there's a lot of truth to that. And the second one is a practice, which I would invite anybody listening to do this, even right now, is you put your hand on your heart. And you can do this when you're, brushing your teeth or doing your makeup or your hair, or shaving, whatever. Every morning, look yourself in the eyes and say your name and say, I love you. And in the beginning, this is hard. This feels weird. We have all this judgment. We're like, should I even be saying this to myself? Like, is there something wrong with me? Am I No, let all that judgment go. And when you can say that fully, without fear, with or shame or judgment, then you're on the path to being able to say it to somebody else.
Beyond powerful. Beyond powerful. Thank you for sharing those two things. All right, last question for you. What is your biggest dream?
Oh, my biggest dream. A few years ago, I changed the tagline on my LinkedIn profile to be change work from the inside out. And I mean this in the biggest way that you can mean it. I mean, there are 3.3 billion people that are working. And so my dream is to influence companies, influence the industry in how we work. In the simple things that we talked about, like companies that balance the needs of their customers, balance the needs of their employees with their own selves, do better. So if we did this, companies and leaders and individuals would all treat the people at work so much better. They treat them as humans first. They treat them as if they would treat their grandmother if they were working there. And companies would treat their customers with real reverence, to really deeply understand their needs and what makes them tick and how to make them valuable, and tell the stories of their customers. In other words, it would be filled with compassion. And so then, and if we're all encouraged to be our own unique spark and bring that full creative self to work, imagine how much joy we would have in a workplace. And if every workplace was trying to live some bigger purpose than just make money, because who cares? That's hard to get behind. So that's my dream, is if we really live the values of compassion in every part of the workplace, and in a way that makes each one of us more successful as individuals, as teams, and as companies.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. It's so interesting. If I could sum up our conversation, which is so hard to do because it's been so much fun and so beautiful, and we've gone in so many different directions, but I feel like there is just such a beautiful and incredible symbiotic relationship between mindfulness and compassion. Mindfulness fuels compassion, compassion fuels greater mindfulness. And if we can bring that into our lives, both personally, but also at work, it changes everything. Just like you've said, from
Absolutely.
the inside out. So, Scott, thank you so much for coming on Seek the Joy podcast. Where can everybody find you, connect, buy your new
Sure.
book, Full Body Yes,
Sure.
and learn more?
The Full Body Yes you can find after May 11th wherever books are sold. So find your favorite place and support them. You can find more about me at scottshute.com or thefullbodyyes.com. They go to the same place. And then follow me for daily stuff on LinkedIn. And feel free to reach out. Don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Everything will go in the show notes. We'll make it so easy for everyone to find you, connect, and learn more. And Scott, thank you so much again. This has been truly such a joy. I've loved connecting with you. And thank you again for coming on the podcast. This was great.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.